That day I drove through the familiar streets of Queens, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Beside me sat Gianna, my wife, silent, but I knew she was buzzing with excitement. She kept glancing at the clock, then out the window as if terrified we'd be late for my father's retirement party. Morgan Radcliffe, the financial titan whose name echoed across all of New York. I felt the opposite. At first, I didn't want to go at all. The thought of stepping into his glittering world, expensive suits and fake smiles, made me exhausted. Yet a tiny spark of hope kept creeping in. Maybe this time, just this once, he would finally acknowledge me. A nod, a single sentence like, "Son, I'm proud of you. I am Dorian Radcliffe, 34 years old, a high school math teacher in Astoria, teaching kids from ordinary families with no power or privilege. But deep inside, I was still the little boy desperate for approval from his billionaire father. You should have worn that black blazer instead of this old shirt," Gianna suddenly snapped, irritation clear in her voice. She was dressed in a striking red gown, hair pinned up high, looking like a queen in the middle of Astoria. "It's your billionaire father's party. Who knows? He might leave you something. We need the money, don't we?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, you're right. But I'm just a teacher, not a businessman. I don't want to pretend. Truth was, I didn't just want money. I wanted him to see me as a real son, not the odd one out in the Radcliffe family. Radcliffe Group, the massive financial conglomerate he chaired, and Radcliffe Capital, the fund he founded, were his empire, not mine. I had chosen a different path, teaching, helping others. But why did it have to be so hard? We arrived at a luxurious Manhattan hotel where chandeliers sparkled like stars. I parked, took a deep breath, and took Gianna's hand as we walked into the ballroom. The atmosphere hit me instantly. Expensive perfume, loud laughter, impeccably tailored suits. Businessmen, politicians, the richest people in New York surrounded us, raising champagne glasses as if the world belonged to them. I felt completely out of place, like a fish thrown onto dry land. The moment we stepped in, I noticed the stares. They recognized me, Dorian Radcliffe, the billionaire's eldest son who chose a poor life. A middle-aged man in a gray suit looked me up and down and whispered to the person beside him, "That's the teacher son, right? Dressed so plainly." The whispers spread like wildfire and heat rushed to my face. I felt awkward, unsure who to talk to. I tried smiling at a nearby group, but they turned away as if I were a stranger. Gianna squeezed my hand hard, not for comfort. She frowned, shot me a sideways glare, and hissed through clenched teeth, "You're embarrassing me, Dorian. You should have dressed better. Look at me. I tried so hard." Her words cut like a knife, but I swallowed the pain. I knew what she was hoping for, some inheritance, some money from my family, to improve our lives. But right then I just wanted to disappear. Then I saw her, Angie Radcliffe, my stepmother. She stood near the VIP group in a black gown glittering with diamonds, looking like the queen of the evening. She glanced at me with pure contempt, then gave a slight shake of her head as if my presence ruined the perfect family image. My heart tightened. I walked over, intending a polite greeting. "Hello, Mom. Gianna and I just arrived," I said softly. She curled her lip, didn't look at me, and said loudly enough for the whole group to hear, "Every family has one. Unsightly scar that won't go away." Her words stabbed straight into my chest. The people around her chuckled, and I stood frozen, feeling the ground collapse beneath me. Why did she always despise me so much? Suddenly the lights shifted to the stage and the entire room fell silent. My father, Morgan Radcliffe, appeared, his commanding presence as an investment titan making everyone hold their breath. Tall, silver-haired, eyes sharp as blades, he stepped up with a confident smile. My heart pounded. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. Maybe he would mention me, even just a little. He began his speech, voice booming. "Today I retire, but the legacy of Radcliffe Group will live on. I am proud of my youngest son, Clay Radcliffe, the future of this empire. Clay has proven himself with successful deals and has taken Radcliffe Capital to new heights. The room erupted in applause. I swallowed hard, waiting. Then he glanced my way. Just a fleeting look, but dripping with mockery. However, some people are simply born unsuited to family tradition. A school teacher. What can he possibly contribute to the world of finance? The ballroom burst into laughter, the sound cut like knives echoing everywhere. Several guests turned toward me, phones raised, live streaming the reaction of the disgraced son. I stood stunned, face burning, head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Humiliation spread through my body like wildfire. Beside me, Gianna dug her nails painfully into my hand. I didn't know if she was angry or what, but it only made the pain worse. He continued, voice cold and firm. The entire investment fund, the chairmanship, shares, and control will go to Clay, my youngest son, the one I believe truly deserves to carry on the Radcliffe tradition, not someone who teaches for a living and worries about his next meal. The applause thundered even louder. Clay smiled triumphantly, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. His eyes flicked toward me, full of contempt, as if I were the ultimate loser. I stood frozen, chest crushed by an invisible vice. My whole body went numb. My father had never once considered me an option, not even for a second. A cold emptiness spread through me, choking my breath. That was the moment the tiny hope I had carried for years shattered completely. I turned to Gianna, searching for any comfort, but she yanked her hand away, turned her back, face red with shame. Morgan looked straight at me, voice like steel. Dorian, son, if you have any self-respect left, get out of this party. This is no place for someone who brings no value to this family. His direct dismissal sent ripples through the room. People whispered and pointed. Gianna immediately stepped back from me as if cutting all ties. Then she shouted, I was so stupid to marry a worthless man like you. With that, she spun around and walked away, leaving me standing alone under stares of pity, mockery, and curiosity. I couldn't stay another second. I walked silently out of the ballroom, each step heavy as if my shoes were made of lead. My heart was in pieces. It felt like the entire world had turned its back on me. The New York night was bitterly cold, wind slicing through my skin, but my chest was even colder. For the first time, I truly understood that I had never belonged to the Radcliffe family. I staggered to the parking lot, hands trembling as I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. The noise from the party still spilled out, laughter, applause, mocking me one last time. I got in the car, started the engine, and just drove. No destination in mind. New York at night was a maze of lights. The skyscrapers glittered like soulless monsters. I turned left, then right, crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, circled back to Manhattan, anything to let the cold night wind rush through the cracked window and, I hoped, sweep away the humiliation clinging to me. Where was Gianna? Did she take a cab or leave with someone from the party? I didn't know, and right then I didn't have the strength to care. All I could see in my head was my father, Morgan, staring at me with eyes like steel, dismissing me like a beggar, and Gianna, my wife, turning her back without a single word of comfort. I gripped the wheel tighter, tears blurring the road, but I didn't stop. Stopping would mean facing reality, and reality right now was too painful. I drove aimlessly for hours, through the blinding neon of Times Square down to the Lower East Side where music poured from the bars. Every red light brought Clay's triumphant smile back to me. My younger brother shaking hands, basking in praise. He got everything. The chairmanship, the investment fund, our father's pride. And me? A Queens high school teacher who tutors poor kids in math, now thrown out of his own family's celebration. Eventually, I turned toward our small apartment in Astoria, Queens, an aging building with a perpetually broken elevator and musty hallways. Once our home. I parked, killed the engine, and sat in the dark for a while. My heart pounded with the dread that something even worse was waiting. I climbed the stairs, each step felt twice as heavy. The apartment door was slightly ajar, a faint light leaking from the living room. Gianna had gotten back first. She sat upright on the sofa, still wearing the red dress from the party, but her face was now ice cold, all excitement gone. On the coffee table in front of her lay a single sheet of paper placed perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me. I shuffled closer, legs like lead. "Gianna, when did you get back?" I whispered, voice hoarse. I'm sorry about what happened at the party." She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the paper. "Sign it, Dorian," she said, voice flat and unfamiliar. "Divorce papers. I want this over right now." I froze as if someone had punched me square in the chest. Divorce papers? Now? When I was at my absolute lowest, just publicly humiliated by my father in front of hundreds. I stood there, mouth open, unable to speak. Gianna, the woman I had loved for 5 years, the one who once whispered, "You're my everything," in the dark, now looked at me like I was a burden. What are you saying?" I stammered, collapsing into the chair across from her. "We can talk about this. I know tonight was awful, but there's nothing left to talk about," she cut in, voice trembling yet resolute. "I can't keep living like this." I waited for years, hoping you'd change, that you'd stand up for yourself, that you'd seize the opportunities your own family offered. But look at what happened tonight. You let them humiliate you in front of everyone, and I had to stand there ashamed with you. She took a sharp breath, her eyes flickering, then hardening. "I need a man with a future, Dorian, not a teacher scraping by every month like your father said tonight." Those words tore through the last scraps of my dignity, because they echoed exactly what my father had hurled at me in front of the crowd. I drew a painful breath, clinging to the last thread of hope. "Gianna, I really need you right now. You've been there for every hard moment in my life. Every time I thought I'd fall, you lifted me up. I love you. Please don't leave me when I'm at my weakest." I reached for her hand, but she jerked away as if touching me hurt her. "It was just one bad night," I pleaded, voice breaking. "I'll find another way. I'll try harder. We can start over. Don't do this." But Gianna only shook her head, eyes glistening yet refusing to cry. "You still don't get it, Dorian. I'm exhausted. I can't tie my life to someone who doesn't even know where his own future is. I need a different path. I deserve more than this cramped apartment, more than barely getting by. Your father was right. You don't belong in that world. And I don't want to be dragged down with you." She stood, carefully packing her things into a bag as if she had prepared long ago. I sat there watching her move like I was trapped in a movie I couldn't stop, heart racing, mind spinning. No, this couldn't be real. She walked to the door without a single glance back. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the empty apartment. I was alone. I sank to the floor, hands shaking as I picked up the paper. The words blurred through tears. Divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. That was it? 5 years of marriage ended because of one party? My chest felt crushed under a boulder. In a single day I had lost everything, my dignity in front of hundreds, the family I had still hoped for, and now the wife I loved. I curled forward, forehead on my knees, and the tears came unchecked. Sobs tore out of me in the silent room, the sound of a wounded animal. Then childhood memories flooded back like a sudden storm, washing away what little calm I had left. I remembered the day my parents divorced. I was 10. Morgan Radcliffe and my mother, Layla Stein, screaming all night. The next morning, Mom held me crying, saying she had to leave. I begged and cried, but the court decided I would live with my father because he was wealthy and could provide better. "You'll be okay," she whispered, eyes full of pain. A year later, Dad married Angie, and from then on, I became the extra child in my own home. I remembered eating alone at the far end of the table while Dad doted on Angie and their new son, Clay. He laughed with them, ruffled Clay's hair. I watched through the crack in the door, aching for the same. Morgan's cold stare whenever I made the smallest mistake. "Why are you so clumsy, Dorian? You're nothing like a Radcliffe man." Clay could scribble a messy drawing and get praised, hugged, rewarded, things I never received. Angie was worse. She scolded me for accidentally tearing her favorite dress while hanging laundry, then turned and cuddled Clay like he was her own. "Clay is such a good boy, my son, not like certain others," she'd say. shooting me looks of contempt. I felt like an intruder, a stain on their perfect family portrait. When I brought home top grades or math awards, Morgan only nodded. First in math, acceptable. No hug, no praise, nothing. Clay won a single soccer game and the whole house cheered, bought him a new bike, took him on vacation. I tried harder, studied day and night, but the gap only grew. When I chose teaching after college, Morgan exploded. "You're a failure, Dorian. A disgrace to this family. Radcliffe men build empires. They don't teach brats for pennies." He screamed in my face, and from that day, the distance became a chasm. I moved out, made my own life in Queens, thinking time would heal it. It only deepened the wound. All those childhood hurts came rushing back, merging with tonight's pain into a single storm. I felt like my entire life had been nothing but abandonment, disdain, and being pushed to the sidelines. Mother left, father rejected me, stepmother despised me, brother triumphed, and now my wife walked out. Who was I? A 34-year-old man with no family, no future? I sat in the dark for hours, streetlight casting long shadows through the window. I didn't eat, didn't drink, just stared at the divorce paper. I realized I had nothing left to lose and no one left to lean on. No father, no wife, no brother. Just me, in the vastness of New York. The New York night stretched endlessly, yellow lights streaking across wet pavement, while inside me everything was hollow and numb. I felt as though I had just lost it all. Family, love, and the part of myself I once believed was solid. Only cold emptiness remained, swallowing every sigh in a city that never sleeps. That entire night I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, childhood memories surged up, blending with the fresh pain of the present. I remembered those lonely evenings in the Radcliffe mansion while my father was busy with Angie and Clay, leaving me alone with a plate of cold food. But now the hurt was even greater because I had lost Gianna too. She had been my last anchor, the one person I thought would stay no matter how the world turned against me. I sat up, turned on the light, and stared at the divorce paper again. Divorce due to irreconcilable differences. Just a few words, yet they pierced straight through my heart. I wanted to call her, to beg, but the phone lay silent on the table and I knew it would do no good. Loneliness wrapped around me like a vice, making every breath difficult. I paced the tiny apartment, hands clutching my head, trying to chase away the images. But they kept coming back, clearer and sharper, until my skull felt ready to explode. When dawn finally crept through the thin curtains, casting weak streaks of light across the floor, I knew I couldn't go on like this. The empty apartment was suffocating. No sound of Gianna's laughter, no smell of morning coffee. Only a dead silence. I had to get out, had to do something, or I would collapse completely. And then the thought of my mother, Layla Stein, flashed like a lighthouse in the darkness. She was the only one left, the woman who had always loved me with everything she had, even though her own life after the divorce had been full of hardship. I had never told her the full extent of what happened in the Radcliffe house, afraid it would worry her. But now I needed her more than ever. I needed a warm embrace, a sincere word of encouragement. I threw on clothes without bothering to shave or comb my hair, grabbed my keys and left. Outside, the early Queens air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint smell of toasted bread from the corner cafe. I started the car and drove out of Astoria, a fragile thread of hope pulling me forward. On the way through the crowded streets, I tried to focus on driving, but memories of childhood with my mother flooded in, washing away at least some of the pain like a warm current. Even as an adult, busy with teaching and married life with Gianna, I had visited her regularly, at least twice a month. I would drive to Bay Ridge with fruit or pastries, sit and listen to her talk about the old days. I never let her feel abandoned the way the Radcliffes had made me feel. "You are everything to me," she always said, and I believed it. Now crossing the Verrazano Narrows Bridge with the salty sea wind blowing in, I clung to the hope that she would be my last refuge. My heart beat faster at the thought of telling her everything. The party, Gianna. Could she bear it? But I had no other choice. Lost in thought, I realized I was almost there. Bay Ridge was peaceful, red brick houses, leafy trees, so different from Queen's noise. I parked in front of my mother's small bungalow with its modest front garden. And there she was, Layla Stein, bent over pruning her rose bushes, her hair much grayer than the last time I saw her. She wore an old apron, garden shears in hand, looking simple yet full of life. A strange warmth filled my chest, like finding a missing piece of myself. She looked up at the sound of the car, squinted, then her face lit up. "Dorian, my boy is here." She dropped the shears, ran over and threw her arms around me. Her embrace was warm, the familiar scent of soap and garden soil flooding my senses, bringing tears to my eyes. She held me tight, half joyful, half worried, as if afraid I'd vanish. "Why the sudden visit? Is everything all right?" she asked, voice trembling, then pulled me inside, still holding my hand. Inside, the house smelled of herbal tea. Old photos lined the walls, mostly of me as a child. We sat on the sofa. She poured me water, eyes never leaving my face. "It's not the weekend. Why are you here? Where's Gianna? Is something wrong?" Worry etched deep lines into her face. I looked at her, hesitated, throat tight. Then I told her everything. The retirement party, my father's public humiliation, Angie Clay, Gianna walking out with the divorce papers. My words came broken, tears streaming, but she listened without interrupting, just squeezing my hand. When I finished, she pulled me into a fierce hug, holding me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat. "My brave boy, don't fall apart now," she whispered, voice warm yet full of sorrow. "I've always been here. Even if the whole world turns away, you still have a place to come home to. I love you, and I'm proud of you, proud of the kind teacher you've become." We sat in silence for a long time, each lost in thought. The room felt thick with everything that had never been said. I could sense her own pain. She had never fully told me about the divorce years, the struggle of raising herself alone. The air grew heavier, as if a secret were about to surface. Suddenly she stood, wiped her eyes, and disappeared into the back room. I heard drawers opening, papers rustling. She returned holding an old, yellowed photograph, edges worn, and placed it in my hand with a look of deep torment. "Dorian, look at this. I want you to see it," she said, voice shaking. I looked at the photo, heart pounding. It showed a man in his 30s wearing a simple shirt, standing by the sea with a bright smile. But the eyes, those deep blue eyes, were identical to mine. The high nose bridge, the slightly crooked smile, everything mirrored my own reflection. Shock hit me. I looked up at my mother. Her face was torn with guilt and anguish, eyes brimming with tears as if fighting an internal battle. "Mom, who is this?" I asked, voice breaking. A cold shiver ran down my spine, spreading through my whole body like electricity. Instinct told me this photo was no accident. It was about to turn my entire life upside down and shatter everything I had ever believed. I sat there, hands trembling as I held the old photograph, staring at the face of a man who was both a stranger and eerily familiar. Deep blue eyes, a slightly crooked smile, everything felt like looking at myself from the past. My mother sat beside me, eyes glistening with tears, her face etched with deep guilt. She let out a heavy sigh, her voice shaking yet resolute. "My son, this is Lachlan Stein. He is your real father." The words hit me like a bomb exploding in my head. Real father? Lachlan Stein? For 34 years, she had never once mentioned this name, never let slip the slightest hint. I froze, mouth open but no sound coming out. Morgan Radcliffe, the man I had called father my entire life, the man who had publicly humiliated me just yesterday, was not my biological father at all. Everything spun. The years I had desperately craved his approval, the countless times I tried to prove myself so he would be proud, all of it had been an illusion. He was not my father. No blood tie. My heart felt crushed in someone's fist, another piece of it shattered. The love I had longed for my whole life from Morgan had never even existed, Why would he love a child who wasn't his? I dropped my head into my hands, tears spilling uncontrollably. Mom, how could you keep this from me all these years? I whispered, voice breaking. She pulled me into her arms, holding me tight like when I was little, but this time her embrace trembled. My boy, I'm so sorry. I kept it hidden too long because I was afraid the truth would hurt you more. But after everything you told me about the party, about how they treated you, I can't stay silent anymore. She took a deep breath, her voice growing distant, as if turning the dusty pages of an old book. I wiped my tears and tried to listen, even though my mind was still reeling. Her words came slowly, full of longing, as she remembered. 34 years ago, your mother and Lachlan were madly in love. Back then, Lachlan was a young financial analyst at a small firm in Manhattan. He was brilliant, gentle, and dreamed of a quiet life with me. We met at a cafe near the office. He dropped a book, I picked it up, and from that moment, everything began. Her tone warmed when she spoke of him. Lachlan wasn't rich like the Radcliffes, but he loved me truly. We dreamed of a little house, of children. Then Morgan appeared. Her voice hardened. Morgan Radcliffe was the heir to Radcliffe Group, the massive financial empire his family had built. He met me at a work event and instantly became obsessed. At first I thought it was just a passing infatuation, but when he realized I had chosen Lachlan, that obsession turned dark and possessive. My pulse quickened. It felt like I was the protagonist in a thriller. She continued, every detail tightening the knot in my chest. Morgan couldn't accept losing. He stalked me, sent gifts, even interfered with Lachlan's job. I begged him to stop, but he just smirked. Layla, you will be mine. No one can stop me. I felt a chill. Morgan, the man I had called father, had been that kind of monster. Her voice shook with old anger. The Radcliffe family was rich and powerful, with connections everywhere. Morgan used that power to frame Lachlan for fraud. He bribed Lachlan's colleagues, fabricated documents, and convinced the firm Lachlan had embezzled money. Overnight, Lachlan was fired, his career destroyed. I sat up straight, eyes wide with shock. He really did that? Just out of jealousy? Mom nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. Yes, son. Lachlan was driven out of New York, even threatened with prison if he ever returned. Morgan summoned me to his office, smiling triumphantly. Now do you see? I can do anything to have you. He warned me that if I ever tried to find Lachlan again, he would make Lachlan disappear for good, prison or worse. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. I held her, my own heart breaking. So the Radcliffe empire wasn't just money. It was built on manipulation and ruining lives. Lachlan, my real father, had been thrown into hell simply for loving my mother. She wiped her eyes, voice growing stronger. Right after that, Morgan forced me to marry him. He said it was to preserve the family image, a beautiful wedding to cover any scandal. I had no choice. I was terrified he would hurt Lachlan again. We married quickly, and just days after the wedding, I discovered I was pregnant with you. The words struck me like lightning. My mother was pregnant before the wedding? With Lachlan? I stared at her, mouth dry. So, I'm Lachlan's son, not Morgan's? She nodded, eyes full of sorrow. Yes, I kept the truth hidden and suffered alone. I gave birth to you under the Radcliffe roof. Lavish parties, judging eyes. But I never told Morgan. He believed you were his, and I let him believe it to protect you, to protect Lachlan. I pictured it, my mother pregnant, alone in that cold mansion, carrying a secret behind those walls. She spoke of raising me. I tried to love you with all my heart, but Morgan changed over time. He grew consumed by work, and as you grew, he saw you weren't a Radcliffe man. You didn't care for finance, you loved books and teaching. I watched him grow colder, but I thought he would come around. Then came the most painful part. When you were 10, Morgan had an affair with Angie. He wanted a divorce to marry her, and to legitimize the new marriage, he fought for custody of you, claiming he could provide a better life. Big house, elite schools. I fought, but the courts favored him because of his money and influence. I remembered that day clearly. Mom crying, holding me tight outside the courthouse. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let me stay with them? My voice shook with hurt and blame. She bowed her head. I left the Radcliffe house carrying the pain of losing both my love and my child. I wanted you to have everything, money, education, so I stayed silent, thinking Morgan would give you a better future. I never imagined you would suffer their coldness, contempt, and cruel favoritism all those years. She broke into sobs, clinging to me. I'm sorry, my son. I thought silence would protect you, but instead I let you walk into hell. I sat silent, stunned by the truth. Everything rushed back. The lonely dinners, Morgan's icy stares, the endless favoritism toward Clay, the public humiliation at the party. It all made sense now because I was never his son. I pitied my mother. She had sacrificed everything, endured alone for 34 years, lost the man she loved, lost her freedom. Yet I also resented her for not warning me, for not pulling me out of that hell sooner. Mom, I don't know what to say. I feel so sorry for you, but why did you let me grow up inside that lie? My voice cracked, tears falling again. The past crashed over me like a suffocating wave. My life hadn't been destroyed by just one party. It had been shaped by a secret buried for 34 years. I held my mother tight as the world turned upside down. Where was Lachlan, my real father, now? And Morgan, the man who had stolen everything? How would he pay? My head spun, but inside the pain, a spark of vengeance began to flicker. I sat there, stunned, clutching the old photograph so tightly the edges crumpled. My mother looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, then placed a hand on my shoulder. Gentle but firm. Dorian, my son, you have to find him. Find Lachlan, your real father. Only he can help you stand again, help you take back what is truly yours. Her words jolted me out of my daze. Find my real father, now, after all these years? My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and fear. I looked up, voice trembling. Mom, where is he? How do I even find him? And what if he doesn't want to see me? Mom sighed deeply, sat beside me and stroked my hair as she had when I was a child, her hand shaking. She spoke slowly, voice full of sorrow, like opening a painful diary. After Radcliffe Group destroyed Lachlan, fired him, drove him out of New York, I lost all contact. I lived every day in fear, Dorian. Terrified that Morgan would hurt Lachlan again if he found out we were still searching for each other. Morgan had power, money, connections. He could hire people to watch us, do anything. I didn't dare write or call. Every night I lay awake wondering where Lachlan was out there, fighting alone. I pictured it. My mother alone in her little Bay Ridge house, staring out the window into the dark, tears falling silently from longing and terror. Her voice broke. Lachlan left New York in the middle of the night with nothing but a few clothes and his savings. He called me one last time from a payphone, panicked. Layla, I have to go, but I'll come back when it's safe. I begged him to stay, but he said he couldn't. Morgan had threatened worse charges, permanent prison. After that, nothing. I lived like a ghost, pretending to be happy in my marriage to Morgan while my heart was shattered. The living room suddenly felt heavier, the wind outside the window sounding like whispers from the past. I took her hand, feeling her warmth chase away some of the cold inside me. Then she continued, and the story grew even more dramatic. 2 years after you were born, I received one single letter from Lachlan. It came from Boston. No clear return address, just a hastily stuck stamp. My hands shook as I opened it. It was short. My dearest Layla, I'm safe. I've had to live under a new name to escape the Radcliffe's reach. Don't look for me, they're still watching. I will love you forever. That was all. She had cried all night after reading it, then hid it deep in a drawer and never replied. She was terrified that any contact would put Lachlan in danger. Morgan could discover it, hire detectives, and she wanted me completely safe. Back then, Morgan still believed I was his son. If he ever learned the truth, she couldn't bear to think what he might do. He could have thrown me out, or worse. Her words sent ice through my veins. For 34 years, my mother had lived in that fear, carrying the burden alone to protect Lachlan and me. I held her tighter, tears falling. "Mom, I had no idea you suffered so much. I'm sorry I blamed you." She shook her head, gave a sad smile. "It's all right, my boy." She stood, went to the back room, and rummaged through a drawer. When she returned, she handed me a faded slip of paper, the Boston address from that old letter, along with a new letter she had written to Lachlan and a childhood photo of me at age 5, grinning ear to ear. My hands shook as I took them. The address was a coastal town in Massachusetts, vague street name, probably his hiding place. Mom's new letter was short. "Lachlan, if you are still alive, please meet our son. He needs you." And the photo, tiny me with bright, shining eyes, exactly like Lachlan's in the old picture. My heart raced with anticipation as if I were about to set off on the greatest adventure of my life. "Mom, do I really have to go right now?" I asked, voice unsteady. She nodded. "Yes, son. Don't wait. Morgan may still be watching. He still has power. Go find your father and be careful." I stood, hugged her one last time, promised to call the moment I arrived. I stepped outside into the cool Bay Ridge evening, got in the car, started the engine, and drove out of Brooklyn toward Massachusetts. It was a night-long journey on dark highways, wind howling through the cracked window. At first I drove aimlessly, mind swirling with questions. What would Lachlan be like? Would he recognize me? Would he be angry at Mom for hiding the truth? Or had he built a new life and forgotten the past? The night deepened, the highway empty except for lonely road signs lit by my headlights. I thought of my mother's years alone, and the flame of vengeance inside me burned brighter. Morgan, the man who was not my father, had stolen everything. My mother's love, Lachlan's career, my childhood. I gripped the wheel tighter, determined. I would find my father, and together we would face the past. Dawn broke as I reached Massachusetts. The ocean appeared, the salty air drifting in. The small town, wooden houses by the sea, waves rolling gently, felt like a peaceful painting. I found the address, heart pounding. A modest house, red-tiled roof, white curtains in the windows. I parked, took a deep breath, and knocked. When Lachlan opened the door, he had no idea what was happening. He was about 60, silver-haired, weathered, but with those same deep blue eyes, exactly like mine. He wore an old shirt, looking like an ordinary man, not the victim of a grand conspiracy. "Hello? Who are you? Why are you knocking at my door?" he asked, slightly puzzled. Trembling, I handed him Mom's letter and the childhood photo. "Are you Lachlan Stein? I came from New York. This is a letter from Layla, my mother." He took them, hands shaking a little. He opened the letter, scanned it, then froze at the part where Layla revealed that the man at his door was his son. His face went pale. He staggered, gripping the doorframe for support. My son? Layla had a child with me?" His voice broke, tears welling up. He stared at the photo of 5-year-old me. The eyes, the nose, the face, an exact echo of his younger self. He looked up at me, eyes wide with shock and overwhelming joy, unable to believe what he saw. Lachlan reached out with trembling fingers, touching my shoulder, cold yet strangely warm. Then he could no longer hold back. He pulled me into a fierce embrace right there on the porch, the hug stolen from us for 34 years. I let him hold me, felt his ragged breathing, his tears soaking my shirt. And then I wrapped my arms around him too, holding tight, feeling a warmth I had never once received from Morgan. It was the real embrace of a father and son, full of love and regret, melting my heart. We stood like that for a long time, the salty sea breeze around us, the waves providing the soundtrack to our reunion. He led me inside, a modest seaside house, old sofa, stacks of books, the faint smell of coffee. We sat facing each other, truly seeing one another as blood for the first time. He looked at me, eyes red. My boy, you look just like me. The eyes, the smile. Layla didn't lie. His voice choked. Then he kept apologizing. I'm sorry, son. Sorry I wasn't there while you grew up. Sorry you had to suffer alone. Sorry I couldn't protect your mother and the child I never knew existed. I didn't know. I had no idea you were out there. I told him about Mom, the letter, the 34-year secret. His face paled as he listened. Lachlan admitted, voice breaking. Years ago, I quietly tried to find news of Layla. I hired a detective and learned she had married Morgan and was living in the Radcliffe mansion. I thought she had chosen that life, wealth, safety. So I stepped back, never daring to disrupt it. I've lived here under a different name, working as a small financial consultant far from New York. But now I know the truth. I opened up and told him everything I had endured, being taken from Mom after the divorce, growing up rejected by the Radcliffe family, treated as an outsider, lonely dinners, Angie's contempt, the favoritism toward Clay, and finally the public humiliation at the retirement party, followed by Gianna leaving me. My voice shook as I continued, hot tears sliding down my cheeks. My father, Morgan, never saw me as his son. He threw me out of the party, called me worthless. And Gianna, she left me that very night. Lachlan listened in silence, his expression shifting from pain to fury. He now understood that Radcliffe Group hadn't just destroyed his and Layla's lives, it had crushed the childhood and future of his own son. I sat there, breathing heavily after spilling everything, my body drained, but my heart burning. The small seaside house suddenly fell silent, only the steady crash of waves outside the window echoing our chaotic heartbeats. Lachlan, my father, sat motionless for a long time, fists clenched, eyes staring into nothingness. Then he stood abruptly, walked to the corner of the room and opened an old safe hidden behind a bookshelf. The lock clicked loudly, and he pulled out a thick, dust-covered box of files. My son, he said, voice hard yet thick with emotion. I've been waiting for this day far too long. I wiped my tears, heart racing as he placed the box on the table. He opened it, revealing stacks of documents. Financial reports, meeting minutes, yellowed photocopies. This is the evidence of what Morgan and the Radcliffe family did all those years ago, he explained, flipping through pages with the precision of a seasoned financial expert. They manipulated stock prices, falsified profit reports to inflate values, then dumped the shares for massive profits. I leaned in, overwhelmed by the sheer volume. Numbers, charts, names, an entire web of crimes spun by Morgan. I touched one sheet and felt as though I were touching my own dark past. Dad, you've kept all this for 34 years? I asked, voice breaking with astonishment. He nodded, eyes flashing with cold steel. Yes, son. For 34 years I quietly preserved everything, because I knew the truth had to be revealed one day. I lived here under a different name, working as an underground financial consultant for small clients, but I never forgot. Every night I reviewed these files, waiting for the moment. And now that moment has come, because of you. His words sent a shiver through me. I felt like I was standing on the brink of a great battle. He was no broken victim. He was a strategist who had prepared meticulously for revenge. Yet he paused, voice serious. However, these old records alone aren't enough to destroy Radcliffe Group today. 34 years have passed. They may have erased every trace, or courts could dismiss it as statute barred. We need fresh evidence of current crimes to corner Morgan and Angie completely. Something they cannot deny. My heart pounded. It felt like stepping into a spy thriller. So what do we do now? I asked, voice trembling yet filled with resolve. Lachlan gave a faint, icy smile, the smile of a man who had long known the answer. With decades of experience as a shadow financial consultant, having saved countless businesses from similar dirty tricks, he didn't hesitate. He immediately called a private investigation team he had trusted for years. They're the ones who helped me rebuild my life after I fled New York, he said, dialing. I listened to the conversation, short, coded like a real operative. Tail Morgan and Angie. Focus on finances, irregular transactions. I need ironclad proof. Call over, he turned to me. They start tonight. These people are the best. They know how to move in the dark. The following days were pure tension. We stayed in the seaside house waiting for updates, but we didn't sit idle. I called Mom, gave her a brief account of the reunion. She cried with joy, voice shaking. My boy, I knew Lachlan would be there for you. Dad and I talked through the nights, filling in the missing pieces of our lives. The investigators began shadowing Morgan and Angie, zeroing in on the cracks that could bring the whole empire down. Bank accounts, real estate deals, fund reports. I pictured them, silent shadows in New York, watching from afar, slipping into data without a trace. Every day Dad received encrypted updates, and I sat beside him, heart swinging between dread and exhilaration. Only 3 days later, faster than I thought possible, they uncovered 2 major violations. Dad received the encrypted report, and we sat at the table to open it. Look at this, son, he said, pointing at the screen. Morgan has been embezzling investor money, millions of dollars, to buy personal real estate. Villas in the Hamptons, Manhattan penthouses, all paid from Radcliffe Capital funds. I read carefully, stunned by the evidence. Transfer receipts, forged contracts, even photos of Morgan signing the papers. Dad continued, voice dripping with contempt. And Angie has been hiding massive losses on an investment project, hundreds of millions, by shifting the losses to other funds, keeping Radcliffe Capital's public image spotless. If this leaks, shareholders will revolt and the market will crash. I sat silent, pulse racing with excitement. These weren't just documents. They were weapons, enough to topple the empire Morgan had built. Dad professionally divided the evidence into 3 groups. 1. Old records proving Morgan's past crimes, stock manipulation framing Lachlan. 2. Fresh proof of current embezzlement and fraud, every transaction, every name. 3. An internal attack strategy timed for their most vulnerable moment, the upcoming annual shareholders meeting. I watched quietly, filled with awe and disbelief. My real father, the man I once thought was only a shadow in a photo, was a mastermind, prepared like a grand strategist. Dad, I never imagined you had all this ready, I whispered, voice full of admiration. He looked at me, eyes blazing. Life taught me patience, son. Now, are you ready to expose the truth? I hesitated for a split second. The party flashed back. The laughter, Morgan's dismissal, Gianna walking away. Then I thought of Mom, her decades of silent suffering robbed of love and her child. I nodded, voice firm. Yes, Dad, it's time to take everything back. Lachlan smiled faintly, the first real smile since the story began. In his son's eyes, he now saw not just pain, but strength. That smile warmed my heart like nothing ever had from Morgan. Father and son immediately began planning. We sat around the old wooden table, papers spread out, sketching diagrams on scrap paper. First target is Morgan, Dad said, pointing at the files. We hit him with the embezzlement evidence and watch him panic. I nodded and added, and Angie, the heir. Exposing her cover-up of the losses will turn the shareholders against her. We quickly agreed on timing. Strike right before the annual shareholders meeting when Radcliffe Group would be most vulnerable. Night fell. The seaside house glowed like a secret war room. The waves outside beat like the rhythm of revenge. Dad pored over the old documents, turning pages with intense focus, murmuring analyses of the numbers. I studied the new reports, embezzlement trails, forged transactions, trying to absorb it all despite my background as a simple teacher. We were no longer victims. We were the storm coming for them. After days of meticulous preparation, we had perfected every file and piece of evidence. The night before the strike, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the sofa, listening to the waves and the rustle of Dad turning pages at the table. The retirement party kept flashing back, the roaring laughter of the crowd, Angie's contemptuous stare, Morgan's blunt dismissal, and Gianna turning her back, leaving me alone. That humiliation now burned like fire in my chest. "They will pay," I whispered into the darkness. The next morning, we were ready. Dad sent the entire package, money laundering proof and current violations by Morgan and Angie, to federal investigators through a secure anonymous proxy set up by the investigation team. "No one will ever trace this back," he said, hitting send with a cold smile. I stood beside him, heart pounding, feeling like we were lighting the fuse on a bomb. At the same time, the private investigators leaked an anonymous summary of the violations to a major financial outlet, the Wall Street Journal. We chose them for their credibility. One article from the journal spreads like a virus before Radcliffe Group can silence it. The summary was short but razor sharp, detailed embezzlement, fraud, and a history of manipulation, all wrapped in a few pages with irrefutable evidence. "They won't have time to react, son," Dad whispered, eyes gleaming. We waited, the air in the house heavy as before a storm. I paced, constantly checking my phone, nerves on edge. Would the plan work? Would Morgan suspect anything? The next morning, the markets convulsed exactly as we had predicted. I opened my laptop, scrolled through financial news sites, and my heart leapt at the first headline. "Money laundering and embezzlement allegations rock Radcliffe Group. Morgan Radcliffe faces massive scandal." Dozens of articles spelled it out. Radcliffe Group accused of laundering money through its investment funds, embezzling millions from investors, and falsifying records to hide massive losses. Fund values plummeted instantly. Shares dropped 20% in the first hour. Trading floors descended into chaos. Panicked shareholders flooded phone lines demanding answers. A sell-off tsunami shook the market. I turned to Dad, voice shaking with excitement. "Dad, it's happening. We did it." He nodded, eyes still glued to the screen, but the corner of his mouth lifted, a rare victory smile. In New York, Morgan immediately called an emergency board meeting at Radcliffe Group headquarters. I could picture it, him at the head of the table, face red with rage, shouting into phones at lawyers. But relentless calls from the FBI and SEC, from private counsel, from major investors overwhelmed him. He couldn't control the flood. Clay, my smug younger brother from the party, was flustered, frantically denying everything to staff. "This is fake news. We'll sue." But inside Radcliffe Group, people were already jumping ship to save themselves. Employees whispered in hallways, "I'm not going to prison for them." Resignations poured in. Chaos spread like wildfire. Dad and I watched it all from afar. We stayed invisible, silent, simply observing Radcliffe Group collapse under the weight of its own crimes. Dad had set up a real-time monitoring screen, stock tickers, news feeds, even hidden camera feeds from the investigators. I sat beside him, filled with both satisfaction and exhilaration. "They're digging their own graves," Dad murmured, voice dripping with irony. At the height of the crisis, federal authorities officially issued search warrants for Radcliffe Group and froze several related accounts. I imagined the scene. FBI agents storming headquarters, sealing offices, panicked employees scattering. The entire conglomerate was paralyzed for hours. Trading halted, phones ringing off the hook, and Morgan sat there, face ashen, realizing his empire was crumbling. One afternoon, Radcliffe Group held a chaotic press conference. News spread instantly online. Investors gathered outside headquarters with protest signs demanding justice, reporters swarming with mics and cameras, staff buzzing about possible collapse. Dad and I decided to get closer, not to reveal ourselves, but to witness it with our own eyes. We drove back to New York, parked in a building across the street, and went up to a high floor to watch through binoculars. I stood on the rooftop of an opposite high-rise, looking down at the mayhem below Radcliffe headquarters. Protesters shouting, signs waving, camera flashes exploding nonstop. For the first time in my life, the name Radcliffe no longer made me tremble. Instead, I felt powerful, like a victor watching his enemy kneel. Lachlan stood beside me, expression calm but meaningful. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Son, this blow is only the beginning. But it's strong enough to bring the empire that destroyed our lives to its knees." We stood there as the New York wind whipped around us, carrying the smell of exhaust and the chaos below. Radcliffe Group was shaking to its very foundations, and father and son both knew the real confrontation had only just begun. This time, we held the upper hand. I gripped Dad's hand tightly, heart racing with anticipation for what was coming next. Morgan had no idea, but the true storm was only just beginning. We returned to the seaside house in Massachusetts soon afterward, but my mind stayed glued to New York, tracking every development through the computer screen and the investigators' reports. The following days passed in suffocating tension. After the devastating blow from the media and federal authorities, Morgan began to fight back, but it was only the weak, desperate flailing of a cornered animal. I watched him hold press conference after press conference, standing before a forest of microphones, face flushed, trying to explain away and deny every accusation. "This is a smear campaign orchestrated by jealous competitors," he declared in one live-streamed event, voice trembling yet still clinging to his old authority. "Radcliffe Group has always operated within the law. We will sue whoever is spreading these vicious lies." But I knew he was panicking. Through hidden cameras the investigators had planted, I saw him slamming his fist on the desk in his office, screaming into the phone at his aides, "Find the source! Who dares do this to me?" Angie, my stepmother, tried to shield her husband, appearing beside him at the press conferences with a forced smile, repeating the same excuses. "Our family is being unfairly attacked," she said, voice shrill and unsteady. Morgan tried stronger counterattacks, blaming anonymous saboteurs. He even hired private detectives to hunt down the leak, but every move only made things worse. Shareholders pulled out en masse, triggering a sell-off tsunami that nearly froze Radcliffe Group. I watched the stock chart on my screen. From its peak, it plunged another 30% in just 2 days. "They're killing themselves," Dad murmured beside me, voice dripping with irony. Rumors flew everywhere. Federal agents could arrest Morgan at any moment, perhaps in his office or at the mansion. The atmosphere inside the Radcliffe mansion, the grand house where I grew up, was thick with dread and paranoia. From the investigators' reports, I knew they were barely sleeping, tearing into one another. Morgan shouting at Angie for her extravagant spending, Clay blaming Dad for dragging him into the mess. A strange satisfaction filled me. They had treated me like trash, and now they were destroying each other. Meanwhile, Dad and I knew the time was ripe for a direct confrontation. We could no longer watch from afar. We had to end it face to face. "Son, we have to go to them," Dad said. "Not to negotiate, to show them the truth, to make them look at what they've done." I hesitated for a moment. The mansion brought back painful memories. Lonely dinners, Morgan's cold stares, Angie's barbs. But then I nodded, resolve hardening. It's time we finished this. We prepared carefully, thick folders of irrefutable evidence and hearts ready for battle. The drive back to New York felt completely different. No fear, only anticipation and strength. We arrived at the Radcliffe mansion on a drizzly afternoon, the New York sky gray like the mood of the defeated. The large iron gates opened after we rang, and the maid answered the door with shock. "Young Master Dorian? And this gentleman is—" We didn't answer, just walked straight into the grand foyer. The air was heavy, expensive perfume mixed with tension, the chandeliers glittering but unable to hide the chaos. When Lachlan and I stepped into the main living room, Morgan shot up from the sofa, face draining of color with a mix of terror and fury. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Lachlan, the man he thought had vanished forever. "Lachlan, you're still alive?" His voice cracked, hands shaking around his glass. Morgan immediately lashed out at Lachlan, trying to mask fear with his usual arrogance. "You're the loser from all those years ago. What are you doing back here? Radcliffe Group will crush you again." But his voice wavered. The old authority was gone. Angie scowled instantly, rising with her familiar contempt, looking at me like a stain. "Dorian, you dare show up while this house is in crisis? You and this stranger, what do you want? I told you you're the scar on this family." She hurled the same insults she had used for decades, voice venomous and shrill. Clay stood in the corner, arms crossed, glaring coldly and sneering, still not grasping the full picture but instantly attacking. Big brother, you show up with some cheap nobody. Who do you think you are? Still just the useless teacher. I didn't respond immediately. Calmly, I placed the thick folder on the polished wooden table. The thud sounded like a declaration of war. My heart raced, but I no longer trembled. The truth and my father stood with me. I spoke first, voice steady, laying out the entire truth from beginning to end. Morgan's frame-up of Lachlan 34 years ago, false fraud charges driving him out of New York, to the current money laundering at Radcliffe Group, embezzlement from investment funds and concealment of massive losses. Morgan turned crimson with rage, shouting that I had been brainwashed by an outsider to destroy the family. You've been manipulated by him, that worthless Lachlan. He's still the same failure, back for revenge. He blamed Lachlan entirely, voice rising to hide his panic. Angie pointed at me, mocking that a mere high school teacher knew nothing about finance and had no right to judge Radcliffe Group. She called me the family's blemish, voice shaking. You never belonged here, Dorian. Get out of my house. Clay roared, furious that I dared challenge the legitimate heir, jabbing a finger in my face. You're just jealous. All of this is fabricated. I'll prove you're making it up to ruin our family. I stood unmoved by their outbursts, initial nerves now transformed into strength. I continued laying out the evidence. Money laundering trails, offshore reports, forged documents used to frame Lachlan, all neatly organized, undeniable. I spread them across the table. Transfer receipts, internal emails, photos of transactions, everything the investigators had gathered. This isn't just talk, I said calmly. The Radcliffe family exploded. Morgan slammed the table, denying everything. Forgeries. All fake. You fabricated them. I'll sue you. Angie trembling and accusing me of madness. You're insane, Dorian. I'll call the police. Clay screaming he was being framed. Someone's setting me up. This isn't my fault. I stood firm, looking them in the eye, and said justice would speak for itself. They could take their denials to court. Summons and investigations would answer for me. The living room felt like it was detonating, shouting, pointing. But a strange peace filled me. Before leaving, I paused and delivered the final truth Morgan never saw coming. The man standing behind me, Lachlan Stein, is my real father. You no longer have the right to call me your son ever again. Morgan froze, mouth agape, speechless. Angie stood stunned, hand over her mouth. Clay looked horrified as he realized I wasn't even Radcliffe blood, and the person they had despised most was the one tearing their family apart. I turned and walked out, Lachlan beside me, shoulder to shoulder like warriors. Behind us, the Radcliffe family collapsed in the truest sense, screaming, blaming, cursing one another in the house that once symbolized power and luxury. We stepped outside into the drizzle, but my heart felt light. The confrontation ended as I left the mansion as the victor, not through violence or hatred, but through truth and justice they had trampled for decades. A few days after the confrontation, federal authorities officially issued arrest warrants for Morgan, Angie, and Clay to face investigation. I was brewing morning coffee when Dad called me over and pointed at the TV screen. Look, son, they've been taken. Live footage showed FBI agents storming the Radcliffe mansion, handcuffing Morgan, his face ashen, struggling uselessly. Angie was sobbing and pleading, "You've got the wrong people. We're innocent." Clay kept his head down, the once triumphant smirk gone, replaced by the panic of a man about to lose everything. All Radcliffe family assets, bank accounts, investment holdings, shares, were frozen instantly. The lavish villas, the yacht, the offshore accounts, everything sealed. I sank into a chair, heart pounding, feeling as though a colossal weight had finally lifted. They're under arrest, I whispered, tears welling not from sadness but from overwhelming relief. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. Justice is here, Dorian. We waited 34 years for this moment. Radcliffe Group was suspended from operations shortly after. Its Manhattan headquarters was sealed for searches. Hundreds of employees stood outside, faces anxious, whispering, Is the company bankrupt? Major shareholders fled, dumping stock in a frenzy that drove the conglomerate's value from billions to mere hundreds of millions in the blink of an eye. Within hours, prosecutors held a press conference and dropped the first bombshell charges. Large-scale money laundering through offshore accounts, embezzlement of hundreds of millions from investment funds, falsified financial reports to deceive investors, misuse of company assets for personal luxury, real estate, and lavish trips, and the fabrication of evidence 34 years ago to destroy Lachlan's career. I sat in silence, absorbing every word, heart racing with the drama of it all. "They're using the old files you kept, Dad," I whispered. He nodded, eyes gleaming. "And everything we gave them. There's no denying it now." The news spread like a hurricane across CNBC, Fox Business, and the New York Times. Major financial outlets called it the worst scandal in investment history, comparing it to Enron or Madoff. The public erupted in outrage at the extent of the Radcliffe fraud, thousands of online comments. They stole from hardworking people. Justice for the victims. The federal trial day arrived amid a New York atmosphere thick with tension like a crime thriller. Dad and I attended court, sitting quietly in the back rows, hidden among reporters and spectators. Prosecutors presented wave after wave of ironclad evidence, old records plus everything Lachlan and I had supplied. Transfer receipts, internal emails, forged reports, all projected on giant screens. The Radcliffe defense lawyers tried to fight back but stumbled, muttering about saboteurs, knives, unable to counter the mountain of proof. Morgan sat with his head bowed, no longer the titan. Angie wept. Clay trembled. I looked at them and felt no hatred, only pity. They had dug their own graves. The trial lasted hours, but the outcome was clear. Morgan Radcliffe, 25 years in prison for money laundering, financial fraud, fabricating evidence, and destroying another man's career. Angie Radcliffe, 12 years for complicity in money laundering, aiding illegal transactions, and profiting from embezzled funds. Clay Radcliffe, 15 years for misappropriation of fund assets, embezzlement, and approving fraudulent investments that caused massive investor losses. Radcliffe Group officially declared bankruptcy weeks later. Its assets were liquidated to compensate victims, millions flowing back to those who had been robbed. The Radcliffe name was erased, now synonymous only with fraud and collapse. I stood at a distance watching workers use a crane to remove the Radcliffe sign from headquarters under the rain. I felt no gloating, only the sensation that the invisible chain that had bound my life for 34 years had finally fallen away. When the case closed, I knew there was one thing more important than anything else, something I could no longer delay: reuniting my real family. I took Dad to see Mom after 34 years apart. We drove to Bay Ridge, my heart pounding like the first time I met him. When they faced each other at Mom's door, decades of suppressed love and longing burst into tears. Mom reached out, trembling, touching Dad's face. "Dorian, Lachlan, you're both here." Dad pulled her close, voice breaking. "Layla, I'm sorry. Sorry I couldn't come sooner." Layla didn't blame. Lachlan needed no excuses. They simply held each other and cried. The reunion left me standing behind them, throat tight. My family was finally whole. The three of us moved back to Massachusetts together. I bought a spacious new seaside home for Mom and Dad so they could spend the rest of their lives side by side. The house was simple. Bright living room, garden overlooking the ocean, cozy kitchen smelling of fresh-baked bread. A new life took shape. Morning walks on the beach, Mom holding Dad's hand, me smiling behind them. Afternoons cooking together, Mom teaching Dad my favorite vegetable soup. Evenings talking about the lost years and the future opening before us. "I remember you once dreamed of a house by the sea," Dad said to Mom, eyes shining. She smiled. "Now we have it." My parents found the peace that had been stolen from them. They walked, held each other, made up for decades apart. I returned to teaching, but now with a light heart, no longer carrying the Radcliffe shadow. We built a simple, warm home, the kind I had never known in 34 years. Family dinners, laughter echoing, late-night stories. For the first time, I felt I truly belonged somewhere. Far from New York, we lived a life free of fear and pain. Only the sound of waves, a peaceful home, and a family finally reunited after a lifetime apart. Time passed swiftly like the gentle waves lapping at the Massachusetts shore, washing away the last remnants of a dark past. Life for the three of us gradually settled into a peaceful rhythm I had never dared imagine. Mom, Layla, spent her days tending the small garden behind the house, planting roses and vegetables. Her hands no longer trembled with worry. Dad Lachlan continued his work as a discreet financial consultant, but now he did it out of passion, no longer hiding in the shadows. And I, Dorian, returned to the teaching I had always loved. I found a position at a local high school teaching math to seaside kids, bright-eyed children full of hope for the future. At my new school in Massachusetts, small but meaningful changes began. That was where I met Avani, a gentle, warm literature teacher who always wore a kind smile. We first crossed paths in the faculty room while I was making coffee and she walked in. Long black hair loose, arms full of old books. "Hi, you must be the new teacher, right?" "I'm Avani. I teach 10th grade English," she said, her voice as soft as the sea breeze. I smiled, introduced myself, and a conversation began. Short, about the weather, about mischievous students. Yet something about Avani caught my attention. The warmth in her eyes, the way she truly listened when I talked about interesting math problems. Brief chats in the faculty room slowly turned into coffee after classes. We sat at a little seaside cafe, salt wind blowing through, talking about books, life, and quiet dreams. "What do you love about teaching?" she asked once, eyes sparkling. "I love helping kids see they can change their own lives," I answered, and she nodded as if she understood everything in my heart. From that quiet connection, love grew naturally, like breathing. No rush, no drama, just simple moments that made my heart move. Avani admired my strength and kindness. She told me once as we walked the beach at sunset, that through the stories I shared, she saw a man who had endured so much yet kept a gentle heart. "You're like a lighthouse," she said. "No matter the storm, you still stand." And in Avani I found the peace I had never known. Her gentleness soothed the scars inside me, made me forget the lonely nights in Queens, the public humiliation at the party. We spent time together. Seaside picnics, old movie nights at home, clumsy cooking sessions that left us laughing until we cried. The love came softly but solidly, like the foundation of a new home. Then one day, as we sat by the shore with the sun setting crimson, I knelt and took her hand. "Avani, you are the peace I've searched for my whole life. Will you marry me?" My voice shook with nerves. She cried, threw her arms around me. "Yes, Dorian. Yes." In that moment, life felt perfect. My parents, Lachlan and Layla, watched us quietly with the simple joy of people who had finally found their home again. They had heard about Avani through my stories and already loved her like a daughter. Mom taught her how to make my favorite vegetable soup. Dad shared books with her. "That girl brings light to you," Mom whispered once, eyes shining. On the day of my wedding, my parents decided to remarry as well, closing 34 years of separation and opening a new chapter for both generations. It was a small seaside ceremony under warm sunlight and the gentle sound of waves. Nothing lavish like the old Radcliffe parties, only us, our real family, and a few close friends from school. Avani wore a simple white dress, hair flowing, beautiful as a sea nymph. I held her hands, heart full, as we spoke our vows. Beside us, Dad and Mom stood hand in hand, eyes glistening, repeating the vows they had made decades ago, voices trembling with emotion. Two couples stepped toward the future together amid waves and sunlight. I squeezed Avani's hand. Lachlan held Layla's as if he would never let go again. In that moment, I felt my life had come full circle, from pain to happiness, from loneliness to reunion. That evening, as our family gathered around the dinner table, Dad telling old stories, Mom laughing, Ivani leaning on my shoulder. I thought of the dark years I had survived. Images flashed like an old film. Morgan's rejection, Angie's contempt, Clay's triumphant smirk, the public humiliation at the party, Gianna turning away. All of it now felt distant, like clouds dissolving in sunlight. I realized my victory wasn't in revenge, though our plan had toppled Radcliffe. It was in reclaiming a real life for myself and the people I love. Revenge was only the tool. Happiness was the destination. I learned that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stand up, say enough, and step out of someone else's shadow. I did that, walked away from the Radcliffe darkness, found my real father, exposed the truth, and built a new life. The lesson I carry and offer to anyone who has ever been belittled is this: a person's worth is not determined by the family they were born into, but by the person they choose to become. I chose to be a teacher, to love my true family, to choose justice over hatred, and that made me stronger than any financial empire. I closed the old journal I had kept throughout the journey with one final piece of advice. Never let anyone decide your value. Never let past pain write the rest of your life. And if one day you must stand against injustice, remember that truth is always the greatest power. I wrote those lines under the warm glow of a lamp by the window overlooking the sea and felt complete peace. In our little seaside house beneath endless sunsets, I finally had what I had longed for my whole life: a real family, a peaceful home, and a bright future stretching wide before me.